And I know this, of course, mostly from the research side, right? When we
Mhm.
talk about community community engagement, where, what it looks like typically in academic circles is the a professor, a research professor gets a grant, so they
Mhm.
determine what the grant's about, and
Mhm.
then they go and find some community to partner with,
Yep.
right? So everything's driven by them. They control the budget, they control the questions that are being asked. They hold all the power, and they go and then call that community engaged research. Um,
Exactly.
and and often a lot of what's called, from what I've observed, CBPR, community-based participatory research, also
Mhm.
has a lot of that same
Elements of that. Right. Right.
elements. And so what we're just talking about is a much more sort of equitable
Mhm.
arrangement between academic researchers and communities, where communities are engaged equitably, or ideally, on the sort of sort of rightmost end of this continuum
Mhm.
would be
Mhm.
sort of
Mhm.
community led,
Mhm.
or community driven. That is, the community comes up with the research problem, and then
Mhm.
ideally approaches the academic researcher, and the academic researcher, what they're bringing is their sort of theoretical methodological expertise,
Mhm.
but not this notion that they're the expert of the entire research project.
Exactly, exactly. And I don't want to put it out there like community led is new. It isn't. What's new about it is it being a part of the bigger conversation around how do we do partnership work with academics in a way in which we're really able to make sure that communities' voices are centered and their experiences are centered, right? Community has been leading work in their own community for a long, long time, right? Been solving problems, been doing all the things, right? And but it hasn't translated into where we know that there's a lot of support and resources, research. It hasn't translated even into public health practice and policy, right? And so community-led means that there's a shift in power, there's a shift in resources, but what it doesn't mean is that academics are not needed. I think often I get into this conversation, I feel like I have to say, academics, you're still needed, right? Like there's this um, either we're in the forefront or we're not, right?
Mm.
There's no like middle ground. But, when we talk about community led and community driven, that academics play a strong role in that. And it's the community that defines what that role is, right? And it's
Yeah.
community that is saying like, we want you to partner in this way. And we want you to bring these skills and these knowledge that you have to support us around this solution or this question that we've identified because of our own lived experiences.
Well, I mean, a lot of this for me, I'm very much always interested in sort of the philosophy of science, and so much of this is wrapped up in, conversations of power, but it's also in terms of epistemic power. Who
Yeah.
has the power to know, whose
Mhm.
knowledge is
Who's
trustworthy?
not,
And
right? Who's
historically, it's the person with
prioritizing?
the PhD who's coming from the university, right? And so
Hmm.
the notion that communities wield their own epistemic power, that
Right.
they have a knowledge of their communities, of the issues,
Hmm.
in ways that academic, who's particularly if that academic is not a member of the community, that they can
Right.
never have. And
Right.
so that's the part of the shift that needs to happen. And so
Hmm.
that, academics learn to stay in their lane. Like, okay,
Hmm.
what you're bringing is
Hmm.
your methodological expertise, your
Hmm.
theoretical expertise, but that,
Hmm.
and that's very limited. This
Hmm.
community likely has a far more knowledge of this issue, of the problems, of the solutions, and all of that than you do. And that's
Hmm.
not something that we've had in the academic community research enterprise so much.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
certainly not anything that, and I can tell you, N of one, coming out of a doctorate program in applied social
Yeah.
psychology, we
Yeah.
never talked about the community at all, at all.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
something that I learned while in graduate school.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and the other thing that I think is interesting is that we need to recognize that this work is messy. So even if there are differences, right? And how the problem is seen or how we want to approach this problem. I even sort of the theories behind the problem. It's okay. We're creating an environment in which we can sort of talk through that, right? Like we trust each other that we can talk through it and get to a place where there is a mutual understanding. Not, it doesn't have to be a mutual agreement. There's a mutual understanding, right? And
Mhm.
so I don't think it's also not about sort of Xing out perspectives, right? It's about being able to say like we're in this room because too often being in the room means that communities are silenced, right? Like even if they're at the table, the decision-making table, they are silenced. And so what we're saying is that silence is not okay. And that we need to think about how we creating environments where there can be dialogue, but that dialogue is centered around communities' lived experience and knowledge.
Wait, you froze a bit. That dialogue is centered around community, and then you froze.
Oh, I was saying that that dialogue is centered around community knowledge and experiences.
Yeah. I mean,
Mhm.
one of the things our paper does is for well, for me at least, is okay, we lay out what the problem is, but in terms of like, okay, what are the next steps? And I
Right.
remember as we were writing this paper,
Yes.
we said we didn't want to have all the answers. This really was a start of a
No,
conversation.
let me correct you, Lisa. Let me correct you.
Oh,
Let
correct
me
me.
correct
What
you.
happened?
No, I was writing up something and you said, Chilma, we don't need to have all the answers. So
Oh, really? That's what I.
you paused me to reflect and say, hey, we don't need to have all the answers. Like this is an opportunity for us to create dialogue, create discourse, right? So we can throw it out there as like, let's have questions around this, right? I think we ended the paper by saying all we know is that whatever is done is that it needs to be fully resourced and it needs to be led by community. And it needs to be grounded in very like critical race theory, intersectionality, all of these theories that we know are grounded in Black liberation, particularly, but also grounded in community.
We ended it by saying what this looks like and how we get there will require lots of critical reflection, some discomfort, a willingness to shift mindsets and systems, and true commitments to improve the public's health. You're so let's also jump back because you saying, well, this is what happened. Let's talk about the process of writing this paper. So we had a conversation, or I think it was, I remember it being warm because I think I was outside when we had one of the initial conversations about what were the key elements, and there were certain things that were
Mhm.
really important to get across, right? We both had
Mhm.
like points. I know for me was always and I've said this to you before because you've been so instrumental in my thinking about this, really wanting to not just talk about community engagement, but community led and community driven as an absolute standard for
Mhm.
trustworthy public health research.
Mhm.
So we had some conversations about what was important, and then you went off and you drafted it. Talk about that process.
Ish. I drafted it ish.
I don't know. I kind of remember what you giving me was like really a solid draft.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, and then I just threw it back at you and was like, what do you think? And that's where the conversation came up around, we don't need to have the solution. Because I think I was getting just grounded. I was pulling from a lot of my own experiences around like how we need to do this work, right?
Mhm.
And what could be the next step. And I
Mhm.
really appreciate you sort of pulling me back, saying, let's just write it and throw it out there and see and get responses and get dialogue going. So yeah, so we after our conversation, I wrote the first draft, threw it back at you. You had some comments, and actually some of several of your comments really defined certain sections of the manuscript, right? Like that really defined like what are the questions we need to be asking around criteria,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
how we sort of need to think about measuring community engagement as a criteria and how it leads to trustworthiness. Like, what does that look like? Um, but yeah, and then I think we just went back and forth. It was very iterative.
Yeah,
It,
and it was
yeah,
easy. I mean, this
yeah.
was like seemed like it was once we got it flowing. I mean, so one of the things we did in this is in terms of operationalizing community engagement and leadership as criterion for trustworthiness. And so we threw out like questions just to get the ball rolling. Like,
Yeah,
are
yeah,
communities equitably represented in decision-making structures? Because
yeah.
very
Hmm.
often that does not happen. And listen, I've been
Right.
guilty of that myself. I remember when I first got to DC, and I was looking for sort of transferring a grant. And so when I was in Philadelphia, we had a community partner. Everything was already set up. And then I changed institutions and went to DC. And so here I am going to a space where I don't have any relationships and
Right,
trying to
right,
find, a community who would in essence sort of serve my purposes.
right,
Here's the
right.
grant. And so that whole system is, and so I'm not proud of that, but
Hmm.
that's really, the constraints that even make these relationships even
Hmm.
more inequitable.
Hmm.
Um, do
But that's
community,
also why we focused on system change,
oh
right?
yes,
System change at the government level, but also system change within institutions, including academic institutions, right? Like we have to think about it at that level and
totally.
not at sort of what the researcher can do, what the community-based organizations can do, how we can creating the conditions in which this can operate, right? And so what is system change? There was, when we were talking about sort of practice, like what does it look like? Um, we mentioned some ways in which to think about that is the role of funders, right? What is the role of funders in basically mandating that community engagement, community-led and driven approaches are a part of grants? A great example of that, I have two good examples. One is, you remember when NIH put out the Compass grant?
I sure do. I sure do. Yeah,
Look,
that's an excellent example.
look, Lisa, when I tell you the conversations I was in with academics, oh my gosh.
Were they loving you? Were they like
Oh,
what?
it was it I don't even know if folks had a moment to reflect on their comments, but it was amazing. Like folks were pushing back in the most creative ways. Well, what if I sit on the board of the community-based organization? Can I go ahead and But what if I have, but what if I was like, oh, so we understand what this really means, right? We understand the power that is being shifted, right? That's what it was telling me. When you're trying to figure it out, like where is the sort of crack that I can go through, then you understand what's happening and the power shift. It
Yeah.
was just, I mean, at one point it was hilarious, but then I was like, I wonder if they're doing some reflection on their comments because this is crazy, right? So the NIH Compass grant was one, and then the recent
And
RWJL.
just we should just say for people who are not familiar with that mechanism,
Oh yeah,
which as y'all, it will not surprise you, it's gone. It went into
it's defunded.
it
It
was
is defunded,
terminated by the
right?
Trump administration in 2025. But basically it was a mechanism that provided for leadership, joint leadership between a community partner and an academic partner.
But only non-academics could apply for it.
Only non-academic because it really centered the
And it
community.
was a 10-year, $10 million research grant where it would really allowed for partnership development. It really allowed for engagement around developing or even identifying the issue, developing the intervention, co-creating the evaluation. It was a badass funding mechanism. Badass. And so then what? Last year, Robert Wood Johnson put out a funding announcement around it. Only community-based organizations could apply, right?
Mhm.
So that kind of um, putting community engagement into practice is important, right? And then you have the criteria that allows for the maintenance and the retaining of, right, that practice, right? So yeah, that's why both were important, I think, as we talked about what does it mean to shift the public health system.
Are you aware of any programs that are doing it particularly well? Like, for example, that got any of the RWJ funding? Like I'm trying to
Um,
think. Off the top of my head, I don't know.
yeah, I
Hmm.
I do, but I can't speak on it.
Okay.
Don't put
Ooh.
this in the video.
Okay.
We actually got funded.
Well, you're an example then.
Yeah, well, I don't want to put that in the video.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, one of the examples that, well, actually, I don't. I mean, and the Compass grants just being just ripped
Oh yeah, there were
away.
some good, some very good proposals. I mean, very good funded projects for the Compass Grant. But I can't name them off the top of my head.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so where do we hope that,
I'm trying to look at some of the other questions. Your
where do
favorite
we,
part in our quote in the article?
yeah, that was me. I just always am interested. I love writing, and so I'm always
Yeah.
interested in like what parts of it. I mean, I think the whole article does just a really great job of laying out the issues and but also giving examples of when this really works. And so one of the examples we included in here was the Flint water crisis
Oh yeah.
in Michigan, and we only knew about that
Mm-hmm.
because of community. That's
Right.
another example of why you need
Yep.
communities. They're in the communities. They know the communities better than researchers ever would. And then the example here in Philadelphia is of the Black Doctors COVID-19 Consortium. Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Alice Stanford, who was
All
just
right.
so
Yep.
instrumental in, and I love that this the title of this book, Take Care of Them Like My Own, and she was so
Mm-hmm.
instrumental in setting up a community system of doctors from the community, in the community, that communities
Mm-hmm.
trusted, and getting out those early doses of the vaccine as an example. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, communities trusted her and
Mm-hmm.
knew that she would take care of them like they're like
Mm-hmm.
one of her own.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I see that as a really great success, an exemplar of what happens when communities trust you. I got my first dose of the vaccine from her. They set
Mm-hmm.
up a clinic just right near my house and walking near it,
Mm-hmm.
and I was able to go there. And it's just remarkable when you're in a system that
Mm-hmm.
you trust.
Hmm.
And then the
And what
second
you know
for the
what I
second,
find interesting
what?
about the COVID-19 experience,
Tell me.
or it's more than experience, but what happened with COVID-19, yes, definitely what was shown is that community-based organizations are trusted, and because they're trusted, they can really push a lot of our public health practices, right? Um, and they can actually implement our public health practices so they don't have to be clinical bound, right? They don't have to sit in the hospital. What we saw nationally is testing was happening in parking lots, testing was
Yes.
happening in churches, testing
Yeah.
was happening, in all these non-clinical places. What we also saw that was happening was what I want to frame is like blinded trust, where there was such a desperation, I think, from public health that we were ready just to give money without restriction. So what was happening, I mean, it happened in Massachusetts where I'm at, what was happening in other places was that uh agencies and foundations were like, how much money do you need? All right, answer these 5 questions. We'll deposit the money in your account. Just do a one-page report. But right, like these very minimal criteria for accessing funding. What that told me was if we can do that under what I call blinded trust because it was out of desperation and urgency, imagine the kind of relationship and systems we can create when we actually trust each other.